Sir David, it's a great pleasure to see you in the chair this afternoon. I had assumed, as many colleagues would have done, that you would be at Runnymede in your green tights, dancing around the maypole with many other dignitaries. It's a thought, yes, that does bring tears to the eyes in many ways. But it is a serious occasion that's going on down there. But it is by necessity a backward-looking occasion. 800 years ago, the Magna Carta was sealed, if not signed, and was a great leap forward of its time. But I think what we're hearing about today, from all parts of the House, I think there's been a really superb debate so far, may I say, that the House is thinking perhaps even about the next 800 years, certainly about the foreseeable future, and certainly about our democracy. And one thing that we cannot do is go back to business as usual because we've got a majority party in the House. Let's just ram stuff through the House of Commons. We've all now got to consider all these sorts of bills seriously. And the Scotland Bill, and I mean no offence when I say this, is actually not the property, even of the people of Scotland, let alone the political parties of Scotland. The Scotland Bill is about the Union. It is about how all of us within the Union, in what may be a transitional period, or maybe another 800 years or several hundred years of happy family relationships, that is to be decided. But this is a moment, as we discuss this bill, as we discuss the local government and devolution bill, as we discuss the European referendum bill, those colleagues who've come new to the House in all sides of the House should be rightly excited that you came here at this moment, because it is a time of immense potential, and it is a time where, again, people of all sides of this House have actually expressed a view that we need to look at this seriously. The word statesmanlike has been thrown around quite a bit, but I think it's actually pertinent in our debates today, because what we do today and over succeeding 4 Mondays is actually going to be of great importance to all of us in the Union. I give way to the honourable member.
Making the usual thoughtful contribution. He said that the Scotland Bill is the property of this House, but he will recognise, of course, the Scotland Bill has been kicking and screaming to the point it is at the moment, because the last Scotland Bill, I seem to remember, moving an amendment to devolve Crown Estate control to Scotland, and this House wouldn't do that then, and is now conceding through the weight of the power of the votes of the people of Scotland to easily give that away. And isn't it a huge mistake of this place to give too little too late? And I'll do this again and not listen to the honourable gentleman across the way.
I'm probably one of the worst in this House for blaming Westminster, and most of the time Westminster and, above all, Whitehall. And there's a distinction we can actually educate each other in over the next 5 years, deserve to have that blame attached to them. But I do have to say to my honourable colleague that he now, with his colleagues, are part of Westminster, and they will need to use the Westminster system, be a part of the Westminster system, if only because they wish to get bills like this passed. And I have to also inform him also that the bills that have been passed to free Scotland in the way that it needs to be freed up, in the way that Nottingham and Leicester and Derby and England and Wales and Northern Ireland need to be freed up, have been passed by this place, have been passed because of the efforts of people like Donald Dewar, because of the efforts of people who got the 2012 Scotland Act through, because of the efforts of all the parties in this House who will, I hope, pass the Scotland Bill effectively through the committee. Although I will try and make a little progress afterwards.
Thank you very much for giving way. You mentioned Donald Dewar, and I would pay tribute to what Donald Dewar did, which in the establishment of the Scottish Parliament, sections were given entire, such as health or education, within which the Parliament could make their own policies without controlling the budget. The problem of Smith is it's made up of little bits and pieces that mean that the two parliaments will be forever at each other's throats, and it cannot be sustainable.
the problem with Smith, the problem with 2012, the problem with Donald Dewar's devolution is that none of them were perfect, and that if you seek perfection, you will be the enemy of good. This is a progress, this is a process, this is a way forward, and it may not turn out how any of us first imagined. And I think one of the key things is to say from the benches which represent England, in my case my own city of Nottingham, which I'm very, very proud, is that nothing in this bill should be something which cannot apply the liberation, the progress, to a city like the one I represent. Nothing in my city should be anything that restrains or inhibits the progress that I would love to see my friends in Scotland achieving too. This is all about devolving power, and I don't wish to sour the atmosphere at all, but sometimes separatism and devolution are sworn enemies, and I hope this isn't one of those occasions. I hope that we can all see devolution as a part of a process, and I imagine, let all of us, if you'll allow me just to make this point while I'm thinking about it, if we continue this process, then we may end up in a place which is better for everybody, and we may end up with the sort of liberation of our localities and our communities which all of us want, whichever nation we represent in the Union. I'll give way to the honourable friend just over the top.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. Would you agree, beg your pardon, would you agree that the only real separatists in this House are those opposite who would quite happily see Scotland dragged out of the European Union against the express wishes of the people of Scotland?
I think all of us have a stronger common interest than sometimes we even dare admit, but we all certainly have an interest in making devolution work. And the bigger issues that I want to come on to are about some of the structures, about how we might all work together to do some of that. How, in sense, some of them raised by my own select committee, which was an all-party select committee, on behalf of this House, proving that we can do certain other things and move forward on devolution. So the federal parliament, which this is, if we can imagine where we might be in 20 years' time, even the strongest small c Conservative, and there are small c Conservatives on all benches in all parts of this House, that throughout the House, saying that somehow we will be in exactly the same place in 20 years as we are today, they would be inaccurate. We will definitely be in a different place. What will that place look like? I suspect it will unroll. It won't be perhaps devised at 10 o'clock tonight, as the honourable member might have wished on his amendment, but nonetheless there will be a progress over that 20 years. What does it look like? Now, for some, it looks like separation or independence. For others, it looks like a union refreshed and renewed. For me, it looks like my people in my area being allowed to make more decisions of their own as of right, not because people feel they're just giving them a little play out of Westminster. I'll give way to the honourable member who's been waiting a little while.
Thank you very much. I see my patience has paid off, and I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for doing that. Isn't one of the problems here with yet another Scotland bill after 3 years since the last Scotland bill is that Westminster gives away, and maybe gives a little bit here and gives a little bit there. It would be better to turn the telescope around and have the relationship that the Faroe Islands have with Denmark, in that they can take the powers that they want to take, and it's not a big deal for Copenhagen to give Tórshavn those powers. In London, it seems a massive deal. At Westminster, it's a massive deal to give people control over the minimum wage in Scotland, a power that Labour blocked, for goodness sakes. It shouldn't be like that. If Scotland wants it, let Scotland take it, and let this place be gracious and do that.
Again, it's always good to knock off a quick anti-Westminster point, so I'm going to join the honourable friend, the honourable member, and actually say everything that he resents about Whitehall, I resent at least as much in respect as it impacts poorly and badly on one of the 10 poorest constituencies in the United Kingdom. So I mean this in a friendly way. He doesn't need to lecture me about how inadequate Westminster and Whitehall are at freeing up and liberating people to get better jobs, to improve skills, to improve their schooling. All those things perhaps all of us hold in common as we move forward. But what I am saying, well, shortly, what I am saying is that we actually need to figure out how progress that's been made in Scotland, massive progress, which I fully support, how that can be replicated. Not just a narrow sense of this is good for us, but if it's so good, how can it also be good for Wales and Northern Ireland and England? I'll give way to my honourable friend and then I'll come to the honourable gentleman.
To my honourable friend, and I commend the work that he did in the previous parliamentary session on his select committee. But isn't this, although today we are talking specifically about the Scotland Bill in front of us, isn't this also about how we re-engage the debate across the whole of the United Kingdom about how we bring powers down to the very local level? So what happens in Scotland today, is very valid for Nottingham, for Manchester, for Durham and for other parts of the Union tomorrow.
And if we have now breached this principle of this wonderful idea of devolution, of actually giving power away, not decentralisation, where Westminster and Whitehall can indeed suck it back, let us actually look at devolution which is entrenched, a devolution which can be stand the test of time. And I agree very much with getting the words right, incidentally. My select committee were very clear about the words around the permanency of the Scottish Parliament. But if you need permanency, you need to look at how, in an unwritten constitutional environment, you achieve that. And you do it through 2 or 3 possible ways. One I've suggested in one of my amendments, which I am moving, Sir David, which are amendments 6, 7, 8 and 9, where the Scottish Parliament itself is protected behind this ingenious thing called the Parliament Act, which requires both chambers to agree to any change in the status of those things that are protected. The other idea is around, we talk about the Magna Carta being celebrated today, a new Magna Carta, a written constitution. And I commend the Scottish Executive for the work that they've already done on that. Sorry, please, if you've got something to say, do stand up and correct me. I'm very happy to take a correct.
The legislation was changed from Scottish Executive to Scottish Government. It's not a briefcase.
I'm sorry for once that I gave way to an honourable member, because this is quite a serious debate, which is that there is a precedent, and if we can build on the precedent, however we name it, that we can build on that precedent and make a broader constitutional settlement for the United Kingdom, then there will be less occasion on which any of us need doubt when progress is made. If it is clear for every schoolboy and schoolgirl that there's, in writing, the structure of their government, then there's less likelihood that people can suck back those powers into Westminster and Whitehall. The other possible way in which we could look forward, of course, I'm sorry I forgot the honourable member.
Mr. Stewart, I claim an interest as an adjunct associate professor of British politics. The honourable gentleman is. I pay tribute to the fantastic work he did in the last Parliament. I think the point being missed by the SNP is that the progress been made since before 1998, the Scotland Act, and since then, is as a result of the sovereignty of this Parliament and this body. But can I also respectfully correct him? We're not a federal parliament, because a federal parliament would presuppose a codified written constitution which sets out the powers, duties and responsibilities as between the centre and constituent parts of a sovereign nation.
It may not be officially yet, we may not have the right words for it yet, but there's absolutely no question that our union is moving towards a federal basis rather than the alleged parliamentary sovereignty referred to earlier. I hope I live long enough to see parliamentary sovereignty in this House. I haven't seen much of it in the last couple of decades that I've been here. The other thing that I think is really important to have clarified is, and I think it's in the interests of my friends in the Scottish National Party, is the role of local government. If you have a federal overarching structure in the United Kingdom, there are certain things that that federal structure needs to define. Human rights is a classic example. Also, I would argue very strongly, the rights of those tiers of government below the national level. Otherwise, all we would be doing would be transferring the state power from Whitehall to Holyrood. And there are some people, and I'll give way in a second, there are some people who do say that that is precisely what has happened in Scotland. I'm sure that's a false accusation. But in order to ensure the freedom of those who work at the grassroots in our communities and our neighbourhoods to define the rights of local government, which is commonplace in every other Western democracy, to do that in our union, while that union exists and while that union is flourishing, to do that, I think, would be something that would make sure none of those accusations could be levelled at my friends who are newly elected. I give way to my old friend.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way again. He will remember in the early 1990s there was a word that was on vogue in the European community, as it then was, called subsidiarity. Whilst that's a horrible term, actually it has a very serious meaning in that decisions should be taken as closely to the people as appropriate. Isn't that just as relevant in terms of the devolution debate, in that we shouldn't just be talking about handing powers from this place to Holyrood or to Cardiff Bay or to Stormont or even to places like Manchester City region, but also beyond that to the local communities?
I think devolution is so good it should apply to everybody in the Union, and I welcome the breakthrough that has been made in Scotland, and I hope to see a similar settlement for England, Wales and Northern Ireland too. And just I often say, my old friend will have heard this before, that subsidiarity, the most ugly word to describe the most beautiful concept in the political lexicon. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Very grateful. An important part of our union has been that it has been a transfer as well as a fiscal union, so the richer parts pay in more relatively and the poorer parts draw out more. Does the honourable gentleman feel that could be sustained if you had full fiscal autonomy, or is that a problem?
As far as I'm concerned, the idea of income tax assignment is one that was applied in the 2012 Scotland Act. I think it is the basis upon which devolution can move forward further in Scotland, but certainly start to move forward more seriously in England, so we don't just have piecemeal breakthroughs, which we're having at the moment, but actually something which can apply to every local authority throughout the whole of England and Wales, and possibly, if they wish, Northern Ireland. I will give way, if I may. He's now in my bad books. I'm going to give way to his honourable friend over there.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. I've been listening very carefully to what he was saying, particularly about local government. But he will accept that it's not up to this place to determine the form of local government in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. It's already devolved to the Scottish Parliament and the assemblies in Wales and Northern Ireland. So, England may determine its own local government through this place, but it's not an issue for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland here.
I think we need to think very carefully about whether the rights which we like to enjoy in our constitution are placed at a federal level, or some can be placed at a national level. And I think that's a debate we need to have. But certainly I would not say, if the Scottish Parliament want to reinstitute, for example, if the European Convention on Human Rights is abolished, that somehow let's fantasise the right to torture people can be used in a particular part of the United Kingdom. I know it's a silly example. Let me just continue for a moment. But that we here, all of us in the federal parliament, would not object to that ridiculous example. So there may be some occasions, there may be some occasions on which there may be transcending values in a written constitution, some of them in terms of human rights, some of them in terms of structures, some of them in terms of democracy, that actually may be in a federal constitution and not necessarily always just in a national constitution. This is a debate that the honourable gentleman, I hope, will join in, as well as shaking his head on this particular occasion. I'll give way to this honourable gentleman, and I do ask him, since his front bench colleague is saying don't take too much time, I'm sure he'll be brief.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way and having a resolute discussion and debate about the future of Scotland and the British Parliament. But I come back to the Westminster Statute of 1931. Is that what he is equating that Scotland should be, a dominion?
That was a bit even before my time, so if he'll forgive me, I'll engage with him. I will allow him to educate me in the tea room over that.
Point of order. Point of order in place,
Point of order, Mr.
Easily.
Could we have a ruling that there's no such thing as the British Parliament, but there's the Parliament of the United Kingdom?
Indeed. I've listened very carefully to what the honourable gentleman said. That's a point of argument, not a point of order. Mr. Graham Allen.
Absolutely.
I'm very grateful for the honourable member giving way. You seem to be advocating a written constitution, but the issue around that, which we've seen very clearly with the Government of Wales Act, is that you start inviting judge-made law. So recent Supreme Court decisions on the Government of Wales Act have led, in effect, to judicial decision-making on a reserve powers model, which isn't actually contained within the Act.
I'm sure I'd be called to order if I went too much into the detail of the pros and cons on a written constitution. Just enough to say there is reams and reams and reams of judge-made law now, but our citizens are not allowed to actually see the basis on which that framework is put into place.
Point of order, Mr. Angus McNeill.
Further to the point of order from the member from Antrim North, France knows it's France, but the UK doesn't seem to know it's the UK. This is an extraordinary state of affairs.
Again, I say to the House, that's a point of argument, not a point of order. Mr. Graham Allen.
Well, perhaps I can come to a point that will help the honourable gentleman who's intervened several times for his future career, and that's the House of Lords and the future of the House of Lords. There is one of my amendments is a new clause which enables the nations of the Union to decide how they would like their representatives in the second chamber to be chosen, elected, balloted for, whatever. And I would suggest perhaps if the honourable member wants to put his name forward, should his party have reached their zenith and suffer a catastrophe after the next general election, that he may wish to put himself perhaps on a list put forward by the Scottish Parliament. I think he's probably had more than his fair share, so if I can allow him. And there may be others who wish to take his place, of course, in the Scottish National Party. But more seriously, Sir David, I believe that one of the answers to this, we now have a 5-year Parliament. One of the answers to this would be, hopefully with government consent, but if we don't have government consent, to actually convene a constitutional convention, to actually have all those parties of goodwill come together, and I very, very strongly hope we could benefit from the views of the honourable members who've spoken from the Conservative benches today. I hope we could pull together a constitutional convention which would not at all delay bills coming to this House. The problem, may I say to honourable friends in this House, is not that we take these bills through too slowly, it is that we take them through too quickly, but there are absolutely cast iron reasons why this bill should move forward quickly. But to actually have, alongside the legislative process, a constitutional convention that looks at all these issues, looks at subsidiarity, looks at local government, looks at a written constitution, looks at English devolution, looks at the human rights that we cherish so much in this country, and does so taking as long as it likes alongside the ongoing legislative process. Sir David, I think we've had a very good debate today. I think it's been good-natured, but it has been statesmanlike. People in this House, of all parties, are looking to how we progress this inevitable movement towards devolution and personal and community liberation. That will be the hallmark, probably, and I hope, of this 5-year Parliament. and I hope very much we continue the discussions and come up with answers very much in the vein that we've tried to do this afternoon.